Welcome to the Pat White Show.
If you get an opportunity, I would appreciate you clicking on the like if you like it and subscribing if you want to, and apparently it'll help me out. Beyond that, hope you enjoy what I'm doing. Well, unless you've been living under a rock for a very long time, the chances are pretty good you know about the mess that's going on involving the Cracker Barrel restaurants. Now, Cracker Barrels are kind of unique. They were formed back in 1969. A guy by the name of Dan Evans. Dan Evans worked for Shell Oil, believe it or not, and he would go around checking gas stations in the particular areas that Shell Oil served, which is around the U.S. His was, well, down in the South. And in one day he was at a Shell station. He says, we could get more people to come into this station if we had a restaurant here that going on with their Shell gasoline. So in 1969, he built the first, Cracker Barrel store. Now, the gentleman sitting next to that Cracker Barrel is actually his uncle. And that's the picture he used because back in the 1800s, Cracker Barrels used to be in stores and people would sit around them, sort of like the water cooler back then. As soda crackers. Well, that was the design he came up with. And those first Cracker Barrels that he created back in 1969, they were adjacent to gas stations. As a matter of fact, they had gas stations at all the Cracker Barrels when they started out. Well, after the problems that came up with the gasoline shortage in the mid-1970s, they just started building Cracker Barrels along interstates and had a particular style. They had the front porch on, they had the rocking chairs, they had the country store, but the food they served was all Southern home-style stuff. You go in there, you get grits and fried okra and all sorts of mac and cheese. I mean, that's what you get. Chicken fried steak, that's what you got at a Cracker Barrel. And then, back in the 70s, they started to expand them outside of the South, which is where they were originally, and then putting them into all sorts of places. Well, now, around the U.S., they've got like 600 Cracker Barrels. They're all over the United States. If you're driving down an interstate somewhere, that's where you're going to find them, close to interstates. And you're going to see the outdoor billboards that show you a Cracker Barrel. Here's a breakfast, lunch, or whatever they're doing. And they're famous for their outdoor advertising because everybody knows what a Cracker Barrel is. Down in the South, folks down there call them the crack. So, going to get something to eat? Yeah, we're going to the crack. That's what it's called. Well, eventually, as the company grew, people started buying into it. It became a publicly traded company. Now, when you're publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange or any exchange you happen to be on, people could buy your shares. And organizations started buying shares of the company and then started demanding things happen at shareholder meetings. Votes were taken. Resolutions were passed. And ultimately, powers got in control of the Cracker Barrel and said, well, we don't like what's going on here. We don't like your margin. Because right now the margins of Cracker Barrel average maybe 3 to 5%. Other stores, much higher. They're saying, hey, we got to get that higher. So other people have come in to run the Cracker Barrel. And currently the latest person to run it, her name is Julie Massino. She came in August of 2023. But you have to understand that some of the main shareholders of Cracker Barrel are BlackRock and Ventura. They control a lot of what happens on that board of directors. And they're saying, hey, we want higher profits. We want to get rid of that white Southern mentality look that is common for, you go down south. So sure, they changed the design of the sign. Got rid of the Cracker Barrel, got rid of the man. Just says Cracker Barrel on it. Changed the interior. There used to be the old wood stuff and the tables and the styles and all the little knickknacks and things hanging on the walls and the ceiling. Got rid of all those. Sort of made it look like a modern day Denny's. That's kind of what new Cracker Barrels look like. I'll be honest with you. If you've been to any Denny's or you know what I'm talking about. Very modern, sleek, stylish. Trouble is, they're hoping to get more people to come in to enjoy the food, but they've changed the food too. A few years ago, they started experimenting selling beer, wine, and mimosas. But the whole concept is you got to understand, most of the people who go to the Cracker Barrel are people traveling. They know what they're going to get. They know what the kind of food they're going to get. It's Southern style comfort food. They know they're going to go into the general store that accompanies the Cracker Barrel, and you're going to end up buying $20 worth of stuff before you even get inside the restaurant. Candy, whatever. That's what they do at Cracker Barrel. But now, the big fuss, changing their sign designation and changing the interiors to make them more like modern and not as Southern or white. Let's be honest. That's what's happening at your Cracker Barrel. Will this blow over eventually? You'd like to hope so, because the Cracker Barrel shares have dropped like a stone. Will they come back? One hopes so. We won't know. Will America turn its back on Cracker Barrel and say, I'm not going to that restaurant anymore because they don't serve what I like? Places not as antique to go to? That could happen. All I can tell you right now is it's going to be a battle for a while. The powers that be want to have it making more money, better profit margin, less looking, well, like Southern, because they don't like the Southern look, because the corporations that own Cracker Barrel, they have their own agenda. We're talking about BlackRock and Ventura here, folks. They have the DEI concept. They're going to do what they have to do to make the restaurants look like every other restaurant in town. Cracker Barrels are an interstate restaurant. That's who's the people they serve. The average folks around you, now they go to their places. But eventually, if this doesn't give up and doesn't let up, you'll see more people going to some other restaurant in their town. It could be a Bob Evans. It could be anything. But right now, the problem with the Cracker Barrel is they're a headline, and they're looking for people who want to come to their restaurant and try them out who haven't gone previously. Will it work? There's no guarantee. Will the mess and the stock finally go back up? You would hope so. But is there any guarantee? Well, considering other restaurants who kind of went through the same thing, there's no guarantee of success in anything. That's how business works, folks. It pays your money, it takes your time, but you never know how success is going to work out. As of late, we've been talking about some people who have passed on. And I thought I would now tell you about a couple of folks maybe you didn't know about, or maybe you did, and a couple of those people that are worthy of annotation. One, Ryne Sandberg. Ryne Sandberg, to everybody in the 1980s, knew him as a Chicago Cub. Played 15 years for the Cubbies. And I got to tell you, as one who attended many games during that era, Ryne Sandberg was, well, part of the Cubs. He was, well, in many ways, Mr. Cub. He had 10 or 9 Gold Gloves. He had 7 Silver Slugger Awards. He was a 10-time All-Star, and he actually, in 1990, won the Home Run Derby at Wrigley Field. Ryne Sandberg was a second baseman. He started his career when he was drafted by Philadelphia, clear back in 1978. And back a few years later, I think it was 83, 84, he was traded to the Chicago Cubs, along with a guy named Larry Bowa, for a guy named Ivan DeJesus, who Philadelphia wanted. So Ryne Sandberg served his many, many years in the Cubs, and he was a great one. He served along with, the Jody Davises and all the Cubs back in that era. Well, he ultimately retired, was in the Cubs organization for a number of years, coaching, and then he went over to coach in Philadelphia, kind of his home where he started. He was there in 2013, and he coached for a couple of years until 2015. His record was 119 to 159. Not exactly great. He quit the coaching, went into retirement. So Rhino was, he was unique. He was a specialized player, kind of average guy, but he could hit and he could glove. He had that famous sign, 2 outs, man. He'd walking around doing this thing. Ryne Sandberg has passed away, but they broadcast his funeral on TV in the Midwest. If you had the internet, you could go online, you could actually watch the Sandberg funeral, see his daughter and his son talking about their dad. He died of metastatic prostate cancer. And that's an unfortunate way to go, but he did. He was one of 2 people that caught my attention who passed away. The second one was Ron Turquette. Now, maybe you don't know who Ron Turquette was. Canadian. He was a Canadian who rode Secretariat. In that fateful race where Secretariat ran the Belmont in what amounts to is about, I think it was 224 for the Belmont back in 1973. 31 lengths win. And that record that Secretariat established back there and still stands for 1973. He was the jockey. Now, Ron Turquette was born back in 1941, July of 1941. He was one of 12 kids, actually quit school to become a lumberjack. Wasn't that big, he was a small guy. Went to racetracks, was a horse walker, and ultimately became a jockey. Set a lot of records. He was in 3,032 races as a jockey. 3,032. But one race, he fell. He had a stumble, whatever happened in the race. He ended up being paralyzed. And because he was paralyzed, obviously, he couldn't race anymore, couldn't do much of anything. Well, he passed away at his home in New Brunswick, in Drummond, New Brunswick. He was considered a great guy, and he was great for athletes and other disabled jockeys. I had a lot of admiration for Ron Turquette. So Ron Turquette, the jockey who rode Secretariat in 1973 to that 31-length lead, the greatest race in history, on probably the greatest horse in history, he too has passed away. So the world has lost the likes of Ron Sandberg, Rhinos, they called him, second baseman for the Chicago Cubs, 15 years. And Ron Turquette, one of the greatest jockeys of all time, born in 1941, he's passed away himself. America and Canada has lost two of the great names in sports, the Cubs and a jockey named Ron Turquette. And now you know. Well, if you happen to drive by your favorite gas station this morning and then drive by it this afternoon, you will notice that the prices have changed. This morning, it was about $3.10 a gallon. And this afternoon, the price had jumped up to $3.50 a gallon. It's a 40-cent increase in one day. Why? Well, apparently the storms that we've all had in the northern part of the state, which really didn't affect us too much, apparently affected the northern part of the state and shut down the big refinery up there in Whiting, Indiana. So with that refinery shut down, that has affected the gas prices in places like Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin. And now, guess what? It's affected the prices in Indiana. So that seems to be the biggest problem going on right now, folks. That refinery being down, anything happens, anytime it happens, it's going to affect gas prices because gas prices it's a commodity. And commodities can be affected by anything. And according to the Gas Buddies, Patrick Dehan, who's the gas analysis, he said, yeah, this is happening. And people are concerned. They think the price is going to jump back up again. They got to adjust their prices right now because they don't know what it's going to be for the next fill up in their tanks at their service stations. And that's what they're doing. They're gambling on what's going to happen for the next load that comes in from that fuel truck to dump it into their tanks. So there's going to be a whole lot more, maybe a little more. Nobody really knows. Once it settles down and they figure out, here's how much it's going to cost for the next, truck to bring us the gasoline, they may adjust their prices accordingly. But right now, you didn't get your gas filled up this weekend at $3.10 a gallon. Well, it looks like you're going to be paying $3.50 a gallon for, maybe the next week. Who knows? Can't tell you. But right now, it's something for you to know. Price of gasoline has shot up because the refinery that refines the gas in northern Indiana has been hit by thunderstorms. And they apparently have done plenty of damage and shut down the refinery. How soon will it take to be repaired? Will it affect our gas prices even more in the future? Well, questions we don't know the answers to. But let's just pray that everything comes back online and our gas prices go back down to, hopefully less than $3 a gallon. But then again, I may be dreaming. In the world of sports, there's probably no event that's bigger than the Olympics. Olympics are held every 4 years, and in 2028, the Olympics are slated to return to the United States of America, and namely to Los Angeles. Now, there's a bigger question going on is should Los Angeles be allowed to keep the Olympics, or should they be moved to another city in the United States? Now, has this been done before? Well, yeah, it's not the easiest thing to do. When Denver projected places to have skiing where, well, there wasn't any snow, so they ended up moving the Olympics to Austria. Not a good plan back in those days. But LA, well, LA's got its own series of problems. The Olympics are going to start in July. And that's, remember, July in Southern California? You know what they get in July in Southern California nowadays? Fires, forest fires, storms. You've seen them. You've watched them on TV. You've seen the areas burn up. Heck, half of Los Angeles is burned up thanks to the storms they've had in LA. None of that's been rebuilt, frankly. It's kind of an eyesore if you look at it. But should the 2028 Olympics be held in Los Angeles? Well, that's a very interesting point. A fellow by the name of Rick Grinnell. He's a special envoy to the President of the United States. He was appointed for that job. He's got a lot of experience. He was born in Michigan, educated, quite well educated. He was a presidential envoy to special missions, and he was a diplomat. He was a diplomat to Germany, so he was the ambassador. He's a PR consultant, State Department spokesman at the UN, and he's done a whole lot of stuff. His name is Rick Grinnell, as I said, appointed by President Trump to figure out what's going on with the Olympics. Now, the Olympics has to be controlled by the International Olympics Committee, but the country where the Olympics is going to be, they've got a lot of input what's going on because they have to provide a whole lot of stuff. Well, they're predicting the Olympics in 2028 to have 11,000 athletes show up. Going to be a lot of people from around the world, and security is going to become a very, very big thing. Nobody wants what happened in 1972 to recur. That was an eyesore of epic proportions. I remember watching it on TV from Europe. Jim McKay was the voice of ABC doing that. When they blew up the helicopter and killed all those people, it's a bad scene for the Olympics. I don't think a lot of people forgot that. So with 11,000, almost 12,000 athletes, their families, and who knows else coming in, well, that's a concerned security for the U.S. of America. And let's go on. We know that Los Angeles, Southern California, in July has forest fires. That's just what they have. And the state of California, with Governor Newsom as their leader, has got a $1 billion debt. Actually, more than $1 billion, but they got a huge debt. Can they afford to put up the venues? Now, yes, LA has a number of venues. LA Coliseum, obviously, is a classic place. We've seen the Olympics there before. But everything else that goes with it, all the other venues you have to have. The water venues, well, they got water. They're on the coast. They have plenty of water, except for putting out fires. But the whole concept is can they do it? Now, Rick Grinnell is thinking maybe the Olympics should be moved from LA. Now, I realize the LA people, the LA mayor, Karen Bass and Governor Newsom are not going to be happy about that. Well, maybe they will be. We don't know. But the problem is, can LA put it on? LA is not the LA that you used to be. LA is now, like I said, recovering from all those storms they had. Areas are still just destitute, just terrible. 2028 is 3 years away. So could it be moved? The answer is maybe. Where could the Olympics move to in the United States that could handle everything in a Summer Olympics? Probably there's only 2 states that I believe that could do that. One is Texas, because everything is big in Texas. And could they handle all the Olympic stuff in Texas? Everything from the track and field to the swimming, rowing, whatever it is they do. Yeah, they got lakes in Texas. They've got plenty of land in Texas. And they've got high school stadiums that are bigger than many college stadiums in Texas. Everything is big in Texas. So the answer is, could they do it? Yes. Would they do it? Well, that's another question. Second state they could probably do it in is Florida, because the Mouse, Orlando, oh, they can set up everything you could possibly imagine. Trust me, they have got facilities there to make everything happen And the world of Disney, oh yeah, the mouse. Orlando, they've got the transportation system. They've got everything. So the question is, should it be moved from Los Angeles? So that's a good point. There's only 3 years left before it happens in 2028. And the U.S. government's going to have some say in this. Will LA get to keep it? Will they be able to put it on with all the problems they have going on? Time will tell. But here's something to think about, folks. Should the U.S. government step in and say, you know, California is sadly the wrong place to put it. California is kind of going in the dumper. And you have a big problem with all those homeless people in California. Where are you going to hide them during the Olympics? And what do you think the other countries are going to think of that when they see it? Just saying what's going on. And the cost in LA, as you well know, pretty doggone salty. And it ain't getting better, folks. It's getting worse. So there's the point to consider. Rick Grinnell, the guy representing the Trump administration, longtime he knows everything, former ambassador, Michigan-born guy. He's thinking about getting this thing taken care of and moved from some other state. And I'm thinking Texas or Florida, about the only two areas I can think of. Good idea? Time will tell. But at least now you know. There is thought being given to moving the new 2028 Olympics from Los Angeles to some other state that can handle it and, frankly, make it shine. Just saying what's going on, and now you know. Well, if you would indulge me a few moments to talk about the passing of what I feel is one of the great broadcasters of our times. His name was Ron Gregory, and Ron, formerly of WOWO, has passed away. Now, I've known Ron for, a number of years because I got to meet Ron clear back in the 1990s. Ron came to WOWO, I believe, in the 1970s, and he became part of the famous group of WOWO broadcasters, starting with Bob Seavers, did the morning. Chris Roberts, tremendous voice. Chris, and then you had Ron Gregory. Yes, there were other famous ones on WOWO, but that was the three amigos that I remember of the great ones. Well, I happened to come across Ron because I ended up working for WOWO starting back in 1992. I had previously worked at a station, WGL, which was across town from WOWO, and I was a talk show host there for one day a week. I happened to run across a gentleman by the name of Gary No. Well, Gary No back then was the program director at WOWO, and we were standing there chatting. And Gary, out of the blue, said to me, "Hey, how would you like to work for a real radio station?" Now, when you get the program director of WOWO saying, "Hey, how do you work for a real station?" I was stunned. So we got to chatting, and ultimately, I ended up going to work for WOWO. I was a part-timer, but this is a weird part. Back in the 1990s, WOWO was still a music station. Now, keep in mind, they were AM station, and FM was big. FM was coming up, and the FM stations were starting to kick WOWO's behind, let's be honest. People were getting FM radios. They're buying them from stores, getting them in their cars, whatever. They liked FM because thunderstorms didn't mess them up. And they were in stereo. You like the music. So WOWO was trying to figure out, what do we do? How do we survive? So Gary said to me, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put you on at 6 to 7 p.m. every night, Monday through Friday, and you're going to do a talk show. I'm going, whoa, okay. Well, the person who was on the air afternoon drive at that time was Ron Gregory. That's right. Ron Gregory was doing the afternoon. So I would go into his studio, which is the main studio at WOWO, had all the windows looking out over the city. And you could see into the newsroom, and then there was a fire escape. They really had a fire escape, folks. They did. Well, anyway, go in there, and I talked to Ron. We would talk for a while. And the guy was just brilliant. He was smart. He had a great sense of humor. And he was just fun to be around. So I would come on after it for 6 to 7 p.m. And they brought in an intern or whatever she was. It was a lady who was working at WOWO, young lady. And she was my producer. She would answer all the phones that would ring. And she had a little computer thing. And there was a little monitor in my studio because I was in a studio across the hallway. It was a very nice studio, but it had no windows or anything. But that's where I did my show from. But I couldn't see her, and she would just put these messages on the screen that I could look at and see who was on what line. She would also make these snarky comments to me. I didn't know who she was, like I said. Back then, I didn't know who to, but later on, she became a very influential part of my life because she became my producer. When I was doing WOWO full time, the Queen, Diane. That was her back then. That's how we got to know each other. But we didn't know each other back then. Later, we did. Well, anyway, so I was doing 6 to 7, and that's how I got to know Ron. Well, ultimately, it came to be that the man who owned WOWO, he's a New York City guy, big money, whatever, sold the station to a company called the Sutton family. The Sutton family in New York owns a radio station called WLIB. It was a daytime station on 1190 AM. Same as WOWO. See, they had to turn their station off at night because WOWO owned the East Coast. We did. So he sold the station to him. And they sent a representative over to WOWO. We all met in the general manager's office, learning that they were going to cut WOWO down, but cut the wattage down, maybe get rid of us, maybe end the station. We didn't know. Well, ultimately, a gentleman up in South Bend, or Elkhart, Indiana, Federated Media, he bought WOWO. And when he did, we ended up becoming part of his chain of radio stations in Fort Wayne that already consisted of WMEE, WMEF, WLYV. It was Federated Media. They were located on Maples Road on the south side of town. So ultimately, we left downtown Fort Wayne, the 4th floor, and we ended up going down to the south side of Fort Wayne. And there, well, that's where I continued to do weekends. Saturday afternoon, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, whatever. I just did weekends. But in 1994, when the O.J. Simpson trial happened, I started to watch that presentation on TV. And every day in the afternoon, I would go on to Ron Gregory's show because he was doing afternoons at WOWO. I'd go into his show and discuss all the happenings that day in court involving the O.J. trial. And Ron and I would banter back and forth about this, and we would discuss it. The yings and the yangs, the ups and downs, the judge-itos, you name it, we talked about it. And that was what I did. Well, ultimately, WOWO started to change. And eventually, well, the folks at WOWO and the big powers, well, they'd left. Bob Severs ultimately retired and passed away in 1999. Chris Roberts left and went over to Ohio and actually bought a radio station over there. I'm doing pretty well. He's still around, so I'm at the WOWO 100-year dinner they had, or luncheon. He was there. And Ron was pretty well cloistered, believe it or not. Apparently, he had a stroke. Didn't know much about that, but Ron lived in a place called Canterbury Green Apartments, which is on the north side of Fort Wayne. And he lived there most of his adult life, to the best of my knowledge. Lived along the river in the St. Joe, I believe. And that's where Ron resided. It was his life. That's where he stayed. So Ron became somewhat of a hermit. And that's not a good term to use, but he was cloistered in because obviously he had the health situations. Couldn't get out. But Ron still maintained his personality, still maintained his sense of humor, still maintained who he was. And he's passed away, folks. So one of the great voices of all time, Ron Gregory, talking to Bodie the janitor. But you'll never forget the dulcet pear-shaped tones of one of the greatest voices I personally have ever heard. I could never emulate him because it wasn't my plan. But when you heard Ron, you knew his voice. When you heard Bob Severs, you knew his voice. Same for Chris Roberts. But the guy with the humor, the guy with the smile, the grin, and the wink was none other than the late, great Ron Gregory.